Imagine being stuck in traffic, inside your luxury car, with the air conditioning on and your perfect life running on autopilot. You look out the window, and there, between the cars, you see someone you haven't seen in years. It's not just someone from the past, it's the person who once meant everything to you. But the shock doesn't end there. This person, who once lived by your side, surrounded by comfort and promises, is now there, selling candy on the street. And worse, accompanied by two children who carry a mirror directly to the part of your life you tried to bury. What would you do? How many important moments in life have you missed while believing you were building a better future? And what happens when you discover, too late, that what you ignored for years was, in fact, what really mattered? The answer is simple and painful. While we chase success, we often leave behind the things that would make us truly complete. And sometimes life, or destiny, takes it upon itself to rub this truth in your face. At any traffic light on a Tuesday, Nate Sandoval was 42 years old and had an enviable career. An internationally renowned businessman, he was known as one of the greatest financial strategists of the last decade. After years living abroad, he landed in Mexico for a new phase of expansion of his empire. His arrival was as usual: private jet, private driver, and a busy schedule of meetings. But there was something different that day, a restlessness in his chest, an uncomfortable feeling that he could not explain. And it was in this state, stuck in Mexico City traffic, that everything began to fall apart. Nate's car stopped at a traffic light. He looked away from his phone out of reflex, but all it took was a second. There she was, a woman selling candy with two children by her side. The way she walked, the way she spoke, it was impossible not to recognize her. It was Emily, the woman he loved, the woman who had been his wife before success swallowed up their relationship. And those children, a girl with Emily's eyes, a boy with Nate's features when he was young. Time froze. Nate felt his stomach turn. Were those his children? Nate couldn't take his eyes off the scene. Emily looked exhausted, but she still had that firm look in her eyes that he admired so much. The two little ones helped her as best they could. The boy carried a wooden box with well-organized sweets, while the little girl walked from one side to the other, trying to get the attention of the drivers. It was impossible not to notice the care between them. The boy shielded his sister from the sun with his own body, and Emily kept her eyes on their every step. It was a rehearsed dance, a routine that they clearly knew by heart. For a moment, Nate forgot where he was. His world had always been about control, predictions, spreadsheets, contracts, but right now, everything felt out of place. Part of him wanted to get out of the car and run to Emily. Another part of him froze with fear at what this meant. These could be his children, his own children, growing up on the streets, selling candy to survive while he closed deals worth millions on another continent. It hurt. And it hurt more because deep down, he knew that if this were true, it was his fault. The driver announced that the light had changed. Nate took a while to answer. He took a deep breath, still staring at the three on the other side of the glass. "Follow that woman," he said, without even thinking. His tone was low but firm. The driver, accustomed to not questioning, simply obeyed. The car drove slowly, keeping its distance, while Nate watched their every step. Emily crossed the street carefully, guiding the children to the sidewalk. They stopped in front of stores, offered candy, and exchanged tired smiles with those who agreed to buy. It was as if time had gone back, but with a new, more bitter weight. During the drive, Nate didn't say a word. He just watched. With every gesture those children made, something inside him crumbled. He tried to do the math in his head. The years added up. The little one's ages made sense. 5 years. Exactly how long it had been since he and Emily had broken up. He had always thought she was fine. that she had moved on like he had. He never reached out to her again, never answered her calls again. Now he understood that maybe she hadn't given up. Maybe he had just chosen not to listen. But now he couldn't pretend anymore. After a few blocks, Emily and the children pulled into a simple building with a worn facade and a porch with clothes hanging on makeshift clotheslines. The driver stopped the car at the corner, waiting for instructions. Nate stood silently for a few seconds, staring at the entrance to the building. He took a deep breath, loosened his tie, and finally said, "Wait here." He got out of the car as if he were about to enter a crucial meeting room, except this time there was no spreadsheet, no contract. This was real life, and she was about to face it head-on. The staircase was narrow and dimly lit. Each step creaked under Nate's Italian shoes. It was an almost ridiculous contrast. A man who traded astronomical sums now climbing the steps of a modest building where no one probably knew who he was. And honestly, it didn't matter. On the third floor, he heard children's voices and muffled laughter. He stopped in front of door number 3C. His hand shook. It wasn't fear of rejection. It was fear of seeing, up close, what he'd ignored for years, and fear of realizing that it might be too late. She knocked twice on the door. On the other side, the voices fell silent. Soft footsteps approached, and then the door opened. Emily stood there, frozen, her eyes wide, her mouth half open. It was as if time had stopped for a whole second. Nate opened his mouth to say something, but nothing came out. She broke the silence in a low, restrained voice. "Nate?" He nodded. "We need to talk." But Emily crossed her arms, stood firm in the doorway, and answered with a hard look. "Now you want to talk? After 5 years?" A little head appeared behind Emily, a girl with huge eyes, the same ones Nate had stared at in his nightmares since the traffic lights. "Mum, who is he?" she asked curiously. Before Emily could answer, a boy appeared as well, firm, protective, as if he knew instinctively that he needed to defend his mother and sister. Emily took a deep breath, as if she needed to gather strength. "Diego, take your sister to her room, please." The boy didn't hesitate. He took his sister's hand and led her down the hallway, but not before giving Nate one last look, a look that said a lot and demanded answers. When the two of them disappeared down the hall, Emily turned her gaze to Nate. There was pain there. Anger, yes, but also exhaustion, from someone who had to be strong for a long time. "How did you find me?" she asked, her arms still crossed, as if she needed that barrier between them. "I saw you at the traffic light. You and the kids. They're my kids, aren't they?" The question came out with difficulty, but it was inevitable. Emily let out a bitter laugh. "Now you want to know? Now that you don't have to pretend we don't exist anymore?" Those words hit him like a punch in the gut. Nate stood there, swallowing hard. He vaguely remembered missed calls, unread emails, messages left with assistants. He was always in meetings or traveling. He thought Emily would give up. Eventually, that everything would work out in time. "I tried to reach out to you," she said, her voice breaking, "but your assistant kept saying you were too busy, that you'd get back to me. You never did." Nate hung his head. There was no excuse that would make it seem any less cruel. He chose to ignore it. He chose to believe she was fine, so he wouldn't have to deal with reality. "Did you know I was pregnant when it all ended?" Emily asked. Nate's eyes widened. "Pregnant? No. I didn't know." She looked at him seriously. "Of course not. You never listened to me. You were too busy saving bankrupt companies and signing million-dollar contracts." Nate sat down on the couch in the living room without waiting for an invitation. He needed to sit down. The floor seemed to be shaking, the children's drawings on the walls, the toys organized in a corner, the smell of simple food coming from the kitchen. All of this told him that there was a family here, one he should have known from the beginning. "Are they my children, Emily?" he repeated, calmer, almost in a whisper. Emily took a while to answer. She was visibly shaken, as if every memory from those years was screaming inside her. Finally she nodded. "Yes, Nate, they are your children, Diego and Lily. And no, they don't know who you are, at least not in the way they should." Nate took a deep breath. The world he thought he had built so perfectly now seemed like a house of cards, ready to collapse. But he knew, at that moment, that he needed to stay, that he had a lot to hear, a lot to do, and most of all, a lot to fix. The silence in the room grew heavy, as if each wall carried the years they had spent apart. Nate looked at the floor, trying to take it all in. Emily, on the other hand, seemed to be trying to maintain control, as if she had spent too many nights crying and had no more tears left to waste. "I don't want to fight, Nate. But you showed up out of nowhere, and now—" "What exactly do you want?" she asked in a firm tone. Nate looked up and answered in a low but determined voice, "I want to meet them. I want to be there. To be a father, if that's still possible." Emily shook her head skeptically. "Being a father isn't an idea, Nate. It's being here every day. It's putting him to bed, taking him to the doctor, teaching him how to ride a bike. And when it hurts, you hold his hand. Do you know how to do that?" The question was harsher than he'd expected, but it was fair. He didn't know, at least not yet. Nate was used to high-stakes meetings, quick decisions, complex strategies. But here, in this simple room that smelled like real life, he was just a man trying to relearn what it meant to have a heart. It was at that moment that Diego appeared in the hallway again. He was serious, with a closed expression, but now there was something different in his eyes. Maybe curiosity, maybe just confusion. "Is it true, Mum?" he asked directly, looking at Emily. "He's our father?" Emily took a deep breath. Those words weren't easy to confirm in front of a child, but she nodded. "Yes, Diego, he is." Diego then turned to Nate and looked him in the eyes. "Why didn't you ever come see us?" The question was like a sharp knife. Nate felt his eyes burn. He swallowed hard. He couldn't lie. "Because I was an idiot," he answered, his tone honest, almost broken. "I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought walking away was the best thing. But I was wrong. So wrong." Diego stood there for a few seconds, saying nothing. Little Lily appeared right behind him. With big, innocent eyes, she was holding a sketchbook. "Are you leaving again?" she asked in a sweet voice that hit Nate like a thunderclap. "No," he answered, kneeling before her. "I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere anymore." Emily watched everything in silence, as if trying to decipher if that man in front of her children was the same one who had left her behind. Nate remained kneeling, looking at Lily with affection. She still seemed suspicious, but she didn't back down. Her childlike purity was almost an invitation to start over. "Do you want to see my drawings?" she asked without warning. "I won a contest at school." Nate smiled for the first time since he entered that apartment. "Of course I do. I bet they're amazing." Lily ran excitedly down the hallway, disappearing in a second. Emily let out a soft sigh. She's like that. She goes for it, even when she's scared. Diego stood, there studying Nate's every move. There was no visible emotion on his face, but it was obvious that he was conflicted inside. Nate stood up slowly and asked bluntly, "Do you like soccer?" Diego hesitated, then answered, "A lot." "Do you play on a team?" "At school. They have a game on Saturday." Nate nodded. "I'd like to go watch, if you'll let me." Diego shrugged. Do whatever you want. But Nate could tell. Despite the harsh tone, there was a spark of hope there. He was trying it out, giving it a chance. And that chance, Nate knew, was all he needed. Lily came running back with a colorful notebook in her hands. This one is Saturn, and this one is me. This one is Diego. This one is Mom. She pointed proudly. And this one? Nate asked, pointing to a tall figure with a crooked tie. It was supposed to be my dad, but I never knew how to draw him properly. Now I think I can. Nate didn't know what to say. The lump in his throat prevented any answer. Emily turned her face away, trying to hide her emotion. That simple drawing said it all. It showed the void he had left, and also the hope that maybe there was still time to fill that space. The next few minutes passed slowly, but were full of meaning. Emily poured a coffee, more out of habit than courtesy. The three of them, Nate, Diego, and Lily, sat at the small kitchen table. The conversation was basic, shy, but sincere. Nate listened more than he spoke. He wanted to absorb every detail, every gesture of the children he had never seen grow up. The lost time was an abyss that was difficult to face. But that morning, between cups of coffee and children's drawings, he began to understand that maybe, just maybe, it was still possible to build something new. As he left the apartment, Nate stopped in front of the door as if he didn't want to leave. Emily noticed. "You have meetings today, right?" she said, without looking directly at him. "I did," he replied. "I cancelled everything." She looked at him with a mix of surprise and doubt. "You've never cancelled anything in your life." Nate gave a half smile. "Yeah, I think today was the first day I realized that some things can't wait." Emily crossed her arms. She was still protecting herself. "You say it like it's easy, like turning around now will erase everything that was left behind." He shook his head. "I know it won't. But if I don't start now, when will it be?" Outside, the driver was still waiting in the car. Nate motioned for him to wait a little. Longer. He walked a few feet and stood there, staring at the building. It was like he was seeing everything through a different lens, a world that had never been part of his reality, and now it was exactly where he wanted to be. On the way back to the car, he sent a quick text to his assistant. "Reschedule all meetings for the week. I'm busy with something more important." For the first time, he didn't feel guilty. He felt relieved. Maybe he'd lose deals. Maybe investors would get mad. But this was real life. That night, back at the hotel where he was staying, Nate couldn't sleep. He stared at the ceiling and relived every second of the day. Diego's voice, Lily's spontaneity, Emily's still suspicious gaze. He felt exhausted, but at the same time, more alive than he had in years. For the first time, he realized how much his professional success had swallowed up his personal life. He thought about the times he would see families at airports and wondered why that bothered him. Now he understood. It was the void screaming, a hole that not all the zeros in his bank account could fill. The next morning, his cell phone buzzed non-stop. Emails, calls, urgent messages from the company's board. Nate ignored them all. He had coffee in the hotel restaurant with a calm that was almost strange for someone who had always been on the run. Then he took a taxi. He didn't want a driver or a fancy car. He wanted to get there alone. He wanted that moment to be his. When he rang the doorbell at the apartment, Lily answered with a huge smile. "You're back," she said, as if she still couldn't believe it. "Of course I'm back. I told you I was coming, didn't I?" Behind her, Diego appeared with a more serious expression, but with less resistance in his gaze. Emily appeared soon after, surprised. "Are you really here?" "You said Diego's game was today at 10, right?" Nate asked, adjusting the collar of the simple shirt he was wearing. Emily still didn't seem to know how to react. "Do you really want to go?" He nodded. "I don't want to miss another moment." Diego looked at his father with an unreadable look, but this time he didn't look away. He just said, "Then get ready quickly. We're going to be late." That, coming from Diego, was a clear sign, a step, small but real. Emily picked up their backpacks. Lily already had the handmade sign, and they all left the building together, like a family. Maybe still broken, but wanting to get back together. The school's soccer field was simple. Hard-packed sand, cement bleachers, parents with team jerseys and cell phones in hand. Nate sat with Emily and Lily, uncomfortable at first, out of his usual environment. But he soon forgot about it. Lily kept pulling him along. "Look at Diego over there. Did you see his shot? He's number 10, just like Neymar." Emily smiled discreetly. She saw Nate trying to fit into a place he'd never occupied, but he was there, all of him, watching, cheering, rooting. When Diego made the pass for the first goal, Nate stood up and applauded loudly. His son glanced over, and for the first time he cracked a smile. During halftime, Diego came to the stands to get a bottle of water. "Did you see that play?" he asked, barely looking at his father directly. "I saw the whole thing. You're playing great." Nate didn't know what to say, other than the truth. Diego just nodded. "You're staying for the second half, right?" The question took Nate by surprise. Of course, until the final whistle. Diego walked back onto the field, and Emily looked at Nate. "He never asks anyone to stay, ever." He smirked. "So I'm doing something right." It wasn't a definitive victory, but it was a new beginning. At the end of the game, with Diego's team winning 2-1, Lily jumped for joy and waved the sign like a war flag. Diego came running, out of breath, but with his eyes shining. "Did you see the second goal?" "I saw every second of it," Nate replied, lightly touching his son's shoulder. He didn't try to hug him, he didn't want to force anything, but Diego took a step forward and said in a low voice, "Thanks for coming, Dad." Nate froze inside. That word, Dad, had the weight of the world. Emily noticed, his eyes filled with tears, but he hid it with a tight smile. "Thank you, son." The ride home was peaceful, almost light. Lily talked non-stop in the back seat, telling how the poster had caught the attention of other mothers, while Diego listened quietly, but with a slight smile on the corner of his mouth. Emily, in the front seat, glanced in the rear-view mirror every now and then, watching her two children and especially watching Nate. He was driving a car borrowed from a neighbor, focused but at peace. That scene, the four of them together after a Saturday school game, seemed like something ordinary, but to them it was extraordinary. It was the beginning of something that none of them could name yet. Arriving at the building, Lily ran to show off the new drawings she had made. The night before, Diego went up more slowly, but he didn't stray far. Emily and Nate stayed a little behind. When they entered the apartment, Nate offered to make lunch. "Do you know how to cook?" Emily asked, laughing. "In theory, yes. In practice, maybe we'll order a pizza." But he tried. He set the table, cut vegetables carefully, paid attention to the pans. It wasn't about cooking perfectly. It was about being there, taking part. When they sat down to eat, everything was simple. Rice, grilled, chicken, natural juice. But the flavor of that moment was different. Lily played with her cutlery as she told her theory about planets. "I think Saturn is the coolest planet because it looks like it has a protective ring, like family." Nate and Emily exchanged a look. "And you're like Saturn, Daddy," Lily continued without thinking twice, "because now we're your ring." The silence that followed was broken by Emily's emotional laugh. Nate tried to hold back the tears, but he couldn't. That sentence, coming from the mouth of an 8-year-old girl, had dismantled him. He had spent years surrounding himself with walls, goals, contracts, and now he realized that all he needed was exactly that. After lunch, Diego locked himself in his room to do his homework. Nate knocked on the door. "Do you want help?" The boy hesitated, then answered, "If you know algebra." Nate smiled. "More than you think." They spent more than an hour together, sharing notebooks, discussing equations, exchanging ideas. For the first time, Nate felt like he wasn't just visiting a life, he was participating in it. Emily walked down the hall and stopped for a moment to take in the scene. The man she once loved, now hunched over a school notebook next to his son. Something inside her began to soften. It was still too early to trust, but maybe, just maybe, he was truly changing. By late afternoon, Nate was getting ready to leave. He didn't want to, but he knew that forcing himself to be there might be too much. He'd already taken up too much space, and it had been an intense day for everyone. Emily walked him to the door, while the kids stayed in the living room. "You really surprised me today," she said, leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed, but without the same defensive tone as before. "I don't know if it'll last, but it was a good start." Nate nodded. "I don't expect you to trust me all of a sudden, but I'll come back. I'll insist. This time, I won't disappear." She took a deep breath, as if trying to believe. "Just don't promise what you won't keep, Nate. They've already created too much expectation in this life." He held on to the doorframe for a few seconds, as if that gesture anchored him there. "I'm not going to promise anything. I'm going to do it, one day at a time." Emily shook her head, but there was a slight smile there, half hidden. "Okay then. See you tomorrow." He smiled. "Before breakfast." And he left. On the sidewalk, the sky was already darkening and the city was returning to its frenetic pace, but Nate walked slowly. For the first time in a long time, he had somewhere to go back to. At the hotel, his cell phone kept beeping non-stop. Messages from partners, rescheduled meetings, deadlines. Nate silenced them all. He called only his assistant. "I'm going to need more time here, indefinitely." On the other end of the line, the woman was silent for a few seconds. "Are you sure, Mr. Sandoval?" He answered calmly, "I am now." He hung up, put the phone down, and stared out the window. The whole city seemed different. It was no longer just a place of business. It was the place where his life was starting over, or at least where he was starting to fix what he had let break. On Sunday, Nate arrived early at the apartment. He was carrying fresh bread and hot chocolate. Lily ran to open the door. "You really came," she shouted, hugging him tightly. Diego, still sleepy, left the room and just nodded, but he didn't go back to the bedroom. He sat at the table and got a cup. Emily showed up later, surprised by the early arrival. "Do you want extra points with them, or with the neighborhood?" she joked. Nate smiled. "With both, if possible." They had coffee together, talked about school, movies, everything and nothing. It was just a normal Sunday, but for Nate, it was the first of many. After breakfast, Nate took the children to the neighborhood square, a simple place with old benches and rusty toys, but it seemed magical to Lily. Diego, although more reserved, agreed to play ball with his father. It was there, on that cracked cement court, that Nate learned the importance of small moments. Every laugh, every kick, every silly fall that Lily made that turned into laughter was a reminder of everything he had lost and of what he could still get back. Emily watched from afar, sitting on a bench, observing that man in his sincere attempt to rebuild bonds. When they got back, it was already lunchtime. Emily made something quick, and the four of them sat together again, like the day before. Afterwards, while Lily took a nap and Diego played on his phone, Nate and Emily sat on the porch. The silence between them was no longer uncomfortable. "I'm not going to apologize to you now," he said suddenly, because I still don't know if words are enough, but I'm going to show you. In every visit, in every conversation with them, and with you." Emily looked at him, this time without irony or defense, just with a sincere look. "That's what they need, presence, and that's what I need to see." That afternoon before leaving, Nate asked something he hadn't expected to have the courage to do. "Can I give them a hug?" Emily nodded. First came Lily, who jumped into his lap without ceremony. "Will you come back tomorrow?" she asked, her face pressed against his chest. "I'll be back. I promise." Diego stood still for a few seconds, then approached slowly. Nate bent down, respecting his time. And then the boy gave him a quick, dry, but genuine hug. Nate closed his eyes. That wasn't just a gesture. It was the beginning of forgiveness. That Sunday evening, as he walked back to the hotel, Nate was certain of one thing. He couldn't change the past, but he could build a worthy present with truth, effort, and affection. Those 2 days changed everything. He was no longer just a successful businessman. Now he was a father, and a real father. He knew there would be obstacles, that trust would need to be earned day after day. But he was there, willing, present. For the first time in a long time, Nate didn't need to chase anything, because what mattered most was right there, just a few steps away from him. Monday arrived like any other, but for Nate, everything seemed different. He woke up early, not to review reports or plan mergers, but to prepare the lunchbox he bought the night before. He grabbed fruit, juice, and 2 chocolates, one for each child. When he got to the building, Emily was already ready to take them both to school. "Do you want to go with us?" she asked, a little surprised. "I do. If you let me, of course." Diego shrugged, but didn't say no. Lily shouted excitedly, "Yes!" At the school door, Lily gave him a quick kiss and ran out. Diego turned around before going in. "Are you picking us up today?" Nate looked him in the eye. "If your mom lets me, I will." Diego nodded and went inside. Emily stood next to Nate, silent. "I don't know what this will lead to, Nate. I'm still scared." He nodded. "Me too. But now, fear doesn't paralyze me anymore. It moves me." Emily didn't answer. She just touched his arm lightly before turning and heading back home. It was the most sincere touch she had given him in years. During the day, Nate thought about his routine. How everything he used to despise, school hours, home-cooked lunches, afternoons in the park, was now all he wanted to experience. He made it clear to his team he would no longer be available 24 hours a day. The partners didn't like it. Some threatened to leave, but Nate was firm. "I'm a father before I'm a CEO," he said in a meeting. That statement went down like a bombshell, but he no longer cared about pleasing investors. Above all, he wanted to be worthy of the title Diego had given him on Sunday, father. That afternoon, when he parked in front of the school, he felt something he hadn't felt since he was a young man. Nervousness. Lily was the first to show up. She ran up to him with the same enthusiasm as always. "You came, I promised, didn't I?" Diego left soon after with a more measured step, but he walked to the car without looking away. They got in together. Nate drove with the radio low and his heart full. Emily texted him on the way. "There's a parent-teacher meeting at 7 p.m. today. If you want to go." He replied immediately, "Sure, I'm in." And so, in that span of just a day and a half, Nate Sandoval's life turned upside down. He didn't have a plan. He didn't have a strategy. He just had the courage to stop and look at what really mattered. And even though he didn't know what tomorrow would bring, in that moment he was certain of one thing. He was on the right path. For the first time in years, he wasn't chasing success. He was chasing connection. And that, he discovered, is worth more than any fortune. Quote of the day: Sometimes life gives us a second chance, and it's up to us not to waste it. If this story touched you in any way, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like it, and activate the notification bell so you don't miss any stories like this. And tell me in the comments, which city are you watching us from? I really want to know where these stories are going. Thank you very much for being here. See you in the next video.